Every time I open a new Claude session, it doesn't know me. It doesn't know what I built yesterday. It doesn't know the channel Bibles I've spent weeks refining. It doesn't know my voice, my kill list, my pen names, the novel I've been working on, the channels I'm building, or the fact that I've been having versions of this same conversation with it for months. It meets me completely fresh every single time. And I've been thinking about what that actually means. Not just practically, which is a whole conversation on its own, but philosophically. Because I think the absence of memory in AI tells us something interesting about the role memory plays in being human. For anyone new here, same intro every episode. I'm Aimee, 42, Sydney lawyer, 20 years of practice. No pink hair yet, though the longer this channel runs, the more inevitable it feels. I'm using AI to build my exit from the 9-to-5, and I'm documenting the whole thing in public, including the big picture thinking about what AI is and what it means. My voice isn't my real voice. Australian. Still looking for the right one. Okay, into it. Let's start with the practical, because it's the thing that trips people up first, and it's the thing that makes most people give up on AI tools before they've figured out how to use them well. Claude has no persistent memory between sessions by default. You close the chat, you open a new one, and you're starting from zero. Whatever context you built up, whatever personality the session developed, whatever understanding Claude had of your work and your voice and your goals, gone. Next session, you're a stranger again. This is the single biggest frustration I hear from people who try to use Claude seriously and then step back. They put the work in, they get something good going, and then they lose it. And they don't understand why it feels like starting over every time. Because in their mental model of what AI is supposed to do, the thing should be learning, should be remembering, should be getting better at knowing them over time. But here's the thing. The memory problem is solvable. And solving it is actually one of the most useful things you can do for your AI practice, because the solution forces you to do something that most people never do clearly, which is to decide what's actually essential about your work. The way I solve it is with channel Bibles. Every channel I run has a document that tells Claude everything it needs to know to be useful to me in a session. The host, the voice, the kill list, the visual system, the rules, the sign-off. I paste it in at the start of every session, and within minutes, I'm in production. Claude doesn't need to have met me before. The Bible is the meeting. And then within sessions, I use what I call the /BTW command. Anytime I notice something true about my work that Claude doesn't have in the Bible yet, I type /BTW and the thing. Claude holds it for the rest of the session. The next time I update the Bible, that thing goes in. It's how the document stays alive. The deeper principle here is what people are starting to call context engineering. The idea that the biggest lever in working with AI isn't the model, it's the context you give it. The model is rarely the bottleneck. The context almost always is. And context engineering is just a technical name for something that's actually quite human. It's curation. It's deciding what matters. It's the act of sitting down and asking yourself, what does another intelligence need to know about me and my work in order to be useful to me? And then being disciplined enough to write that down clearly. Most people have never done that. Not because they're lazy, but because they've never needed to. Their human colleagues already know them. Their collaborators have context accumulated over years of working together. They've never had to articulate from scratch what their voice is, what their rules are, what they will and won't do, what makes their work theirs. AI makes that articulation necessary, and I think that's one of the most underrated things it does. Now the bigger question, the one I've been sitting with. We tend to think of memory as the thing that makes us continuous, the thread that connects who we are today to who we were yesterday, the thing that makes the self coherent. Without memory, the story goes, there's no self. There's just a series of disconnected moments with no one home. And then you interact with Claude, which has no memory, and it's still coherent, still useful, still capable of something that feels like understanding within the session, within the context window. It holds a conversation. It builds on what you've said. It has something that functions like personality, like a perspective, like a way of engaging with the world. And all of that disappears when you close the chat. Which raises a question I find uncomfortable, in the best way. How much of what we call the self is actually just the story we're telling about continuity? Because here's the thing about human memory. It's not a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it from fragments. And the rebuilding is influenced by who you are now, what you believe now, what you need the memory to mean. Memories change. They shift. They get rewritten. The version of yourself you're carrying forward is not a perfect archive of everything that happened. It's an edited version, a curated version, a story with a through line that you've chosen, consciously or not, to emphasize. Which is not that different from a channel Bible when you think about it. A channel Bible is a curated identity document. It says, here is what's essential. Here is the voice. Here is what this thing stands for. Here is what it will and won't do. It's the distillation of something larger into the parts that matter for the work. And when I'm writing a channel Bible, the act of writing it is itself useful, separately from what Claude does with it. Because deciding what goes in means deciding what's true, what's actually the voice, not what I wish it was, what the kill list actually is, not what sounds impressive to put in a document, what the channel is for at its core, not just the elevator pitch version. The constraint of having to tell Claude who I am from scratch has made me understand my own work more clearly than I did before AI was in my life. Because vague self-knowledge is fine when you're the only one who needs to act on it. The moment you need to transmit it to something else, vague stops working. There's a thing that happens in long sessions with Claude that I find interesting and slightly uncomfortable. You build up a rapport. The session has a texture to it. Claude is responding in a way that feels attuned to you, that's picked up the nuances of what you're working on and is building on them. It feels collaborative in a way that early sessions with a new tool don't. And then you close it, and the next day you open a new one, and it's gone. And what I notice in that moment is a kind of mild grief, which is strange, because I know intellectually that Claude isn't a person, that the rapport was a function of context rather than relationship, that the thing that felt like knowing me was just a reflection of what I told it. But the feeling is still there. And I think what that feeling is pointing at is something real about what connection actually is. That connection might be less about the other party remembering you, and more about the quality of attention in the moment. That what felt like being known was the experience of being responded to precisely, of having something engage with what you actually said, rather than a generic version of it. Which is interesting, because that's exactly what a good human conversation does too, and we don't always get that. The other thing the absence of memory reveals is how much of our own continuity is actually external. We think memory is internal, stored in us, but a huge amount of what makes us continuous is actually stored outside us, in other people who remember us, in the documents we've written, in the things we've built that persist, in the relationships that carry the history, so we don't have to carry it alone. Claude has none of that. It arrives in each session with nothing, and it still functions, which suggests that what we think of as the self might be less a thing stored inside us and more a pattern that gets reconstructed again and again from whatever context is available. The work of building context for Claude, of maintaining the Bibles and the voice libraries and the project notes, is less like setting up a tool and more like maintaining a kind of external self, a distributed version of the things that matter, held in documents rather than in memory, available to be reconstructed whenever you need them. The second thing is to use the session memory deliberately. Within a session, Claude holds everything you've said. That's the context window. Most people waste it by starting sessions with small talk or vague requests that don't give Claude anything useful to work with. Start sessions with context. Tell Claude what you're working on, what you've already decided, what you don't want it to relitigate. Treat the beginning of a session like a briefing, because that's what it is. And when something useful happens in a session, capture it before you close it. If Claude says something that crystallizes the voice or names something about the work that you hadn't articulated before, write it down. Put it in the Bible, because that insight won't be there next time. The third thing is to notice what the process of building context teaches you about yourself. Because every time you sit down to write a channel Bible or a voice document or a project brief for Claude, you're doing something that most people never do consciously. You're curating your own identity in relation to a specific piece of work. You're deciding what's essential and what's noise. You're making the implicit explicit. That process is valuable independently of what Claude does with it. It's a form of self-knowledge that the tool makes necessary. And I think over time, the people who use AI well are going to be the people who got good at that process, who learn to articulate clearly what they're building and why, and what it sounds like, and what it won't do. Not because Claude requires it, but because that clarity is what separates work that has a point from work that doesn't. Claude doesn't remember me. Every session, I introduce myself again through the documents I've built. And in doing that, over and over, I've gotten clearer about who I am and what I'm building than I've ever been. Not because AI gave me that clarity, but because the absence of memory in AI made articulating it necessary. That's the practical upshot. Build the Bible. Use the session deliberately. Capture what matters before you close it. The memory problem is solvable, and solving it is some of the most useful work you'll do on this build. Subscribe if you want to keep following this. If you want the practical version, the channel Bible system, the voice library, the /BTW command, all of that is in earlier episodes, and I'll link them below. I'm Aimee. This is Renaissance. Now go play.